In a 2026 retirement survey, Americans with workplace retirement plans said they believed they would need about $1.2 million to retire comfortably. Yet 51% expected to retire with less than $500,000. That does not mean everyone needs $1.2 million. Someone who owns a home outright and lives cheaply may need far less. Someone facing high housing or medical costs may need far more. But the gap reveals something important. Millions of Americans are approaching retirement with a very different financial reality from the one they expected. For generations, retirement was treated almost like a date. Work into your 60s, leave your job, collect Social Security, live on your pension and savings. But increasingly, retirement is becoming something else, not an age, a financial condition, and if you cannot afford that condition, you keep working. To understand why, you have to look at how Americans pay for retirement. There are three basic sources: Social Security, retirement benefits from an employer, and whatever the individual manages to save. But the employer part has changed dramatically. For decades, many workers relied on a defined benefit pension. The basic idea was simple. Work for a company long enough, and after retirement, the company promises you a regular payment, usually based on your salary and years of service. You know roughly what income is waiting for you, and the employer carries much of the investment risk. Today, the dominant system looks very different. The 401k. Instead of promising an income, the employer helps workers build an investment account. What you eventually have depends on how much you contribute, how much your employer contributes, how markets perform, and how long the money has time to grow. By March 2025, only about 14% of private sector workers had access to a traditional defined benefit pension. Around 70% had access to a defined contribution plan. And that changes the most important question. With a pension, you ask, how much will my employer pay me? With a 401k, you ask, did I save enough? The 401k system has real advantages. Workers can take their money with them when they change jobs. Employers can match contributions. The money can grow in the market for decades. And automatic enrollment has helped more workers participate. For people who earn enough, save consistently, and invest for a long time, the system can work extremely well. But that is also the problem. It works best when life goes according to plan. You start saving early, you remain employed, you do not need to withdraw the money. Your employer offers a good plan. Markets perform reasonably well, and you can keep contributing for decades. Real life is rarely that clean. People lose jobs, they raise children, they pay rent, they get divorced, they care for parents, they face medical bills, and every dollar needed today is a dollar that cannot compound for retirement 30 years from now. That is one reason retirement balances can look very different depending on whether you use an average or a median. Among participants in Vanguard defined contribution plans at the end of 2025, the average account balance was about $168,000. The median was only about $44,000. That does not mean the typical American will retire with only $44,000. People can have multiple accounts, pensions, homes, and other assets, and younger workers naturally have less saved than older workers, but the gap shows how unevenly retirement wealth is distributed. Some households have accumulated enormous balances, many others have not. And even what sounds like a large amount of money can look very different once retirement begins. Take $500,000. For most people, that is a substantial amount of wealth. But now ask that money to replace part of a paycheck for 20 or 30 years. It has to help pay for food, housing, transportation, insurance, and healthcare. The money can remain invested. Social Security adds another source of income. Retirees may spend less than they did while working. So the calculation is not as simple as dividing $500,000 by the number of years you expect to live. But the basic challenge remains. Retirement turns one pile of money into decades of expenses. And Americans increasingly have to make that transformation themselves. Healthcare makes the calculation even harder. Medicare generally does not begin until age 65, so someone who wants to stop working at 60 may face a 5-year gap between losing employer health insurance and becoming eligible for Medicare. Private coverage during those years can easily cost more than $1,000 a month before subsidies, depending on the person and plan. That means retiring early is not simply about giving up a paycheck. It can also mean paying directly for benefits that used to come with the job. Suddenly, working a few more years has financial value beyond the salary itself. It may mean keeping health insurance, avoiding withdrawals from retirement accounts, and giving those investments more time to grow. Then there is Social Security. For millions of Americans, it remains the foundation of retirement income. In mid-2026, the average retired worker received a little over $2,000 per month. That is extremely valuable, but whether it is enough depends heavily on what your life costs. Someone who owns a home outright and has low expenses may be in a very different position from someone still paying high rent, a mortgage, or significant medical bills. And Social Security has its own long-term funding challenge. This part is often misunderstood. Social Security is not expected to suddenly disappear. Payroll taxes would continue flowing into the system. But under the 2026 Trustees Report, the Retirement Trust Fund is projected to exhaust its reserves in 2032 if Congress makes no changes. At that point, incoming revenue would be enough to cover roughly 78% of scheduled retirement benefits. That does not mean benefits will necessarily be cut by 22%. Congress could change taxes, benefits, or the structure of the program before then. But for a worker trying to plan decades into the future, uncertainty itself matters. How much should you save? How long should you work? When should you claim Social Security? How much can you safely spend every year? The modern retirement system increasingly asks individuals to answer those questions themselves. And this may be the biggest change of all. The risk moved. Think about what a worker with a 401k has to predict. How long will I live? How much will healthcare cost? What will inflation do? What will my investments return? Will I still have a mortgage? Will Social Security change? How much can I withdraw without running out? Nobody knows the answers. But increasingly, the consequences of guessing wrong fall on the individual. Save too little, and you may have to work longer. Invest too cautiously, and inflation may erode your purchasing power. Take too much risk, and a market crash near retirement can hit at exactly the wrong time. Withdraw too quickly, and you can outlive your money. Live much longer than expected, and a plan that looks safe at 65 may look very different at 90. This is why the retirement problem is not simply a savings problem, it is a decades-long risk management problem. A traditional pension largely handled that problem for the worker. The modern system increasingly hands it back to them. And more older Americans remain in the workforce than they did at the beginning of this century. In 2025, roughly 1 in 5 Americans aged 65 or older was still in the labor force. That does not mean all of them were forced to work. Some enjoy their jobs. Some want to remain active. Some choose part-time work. But whether by choice or necessity, retirement is becoming less of a clean dividing line. For many people, the transition may look less like work to retirement and more like full-time work to part-time work to Social Security to retirement. The boundary is becoming blurry. And there is a simple reason. Working longer can improve the retirement calculation in several ways at once. You keep earning wages, you delay withdrawals, your investments get more time to grow, you may keep employer health insurance, and delaying Social Security can increase the monthly benefit. For someone who is close to being able to retire, a few additional years of work can change the math dramatically, which creates an uncomfortable reality. For many Americans, one of the most powerful retirement strategies may simply be retire later. This does not mean the American retirement system is universally broken. Millions of people retire comfortably. 401s have created enormous wealth. Social Security still provides a powerful safety net. Employer matching helps workers build savings. And someone who begins investing early can benefit from decades of compounding. But the system has changed what retirement security means. A pension turned decades of employment into a promised stream of income. The modern system increasingly turns decades of employment into an account balance, and then asks the worker to turn that balance back into income for the rest of their life. That sounds like a subtle difference. Economically, it is enormous. A pension says, here is your monthly check. A 401k says, here is your money, make it last. That helps explain why so many Americans feel uncertain about retirement even after years of saving. In 2025, only 35% of non-retired Americans said they believed their retirement savings plan was on track. At the same time, retirement plan participants told surveys they believed they needed around $1.2 million for a comfortable retirement, while 51% expected to retire with less than $500,000. Those numbers do not mean retirement is impossible, but they explain why it increasingly feels less like an inevitable stage of life and more like something that has to be reached financially. A person can turn 65, their account balance does not care, rent does not care, healthcare costs do not care. You may have reached retirement age, but financially, retirement age may not have reached you. For generations, retirement was something Americans thought of as an age. Work for decades, build security, then eventually stop working. That idea has not disappeared, but the mechanism behind it has changed. The pension became the 401k. Guaranteed income became investment returns. A company promise became an individual account, and much of the risk moved with it. So increasingly, retirement is becoming something else. Not an age, a number, and if that number keeps moving farther away, the hardest question may no longer be what Americans will do after they retire. It may be whether they can afford to retire at all.